There are buildings that make you smile if you look at them. They are called positive, like some people are. And this is Germany's building #1 when it comes to optimism. It is called accordingly, Happy Rizzi House. Happy Rizzi House, or simply Rizzi House, was named after an American artist, James Rizzi. He is an artist, not an architect, an artist who made drawings. However, they are absolutely necessary for this building. Bright colors, smiling faces, and all this is in the center of an old and conservative German town. You can understand it if you look at the surrounding houses in the area. Here, some buildings were constructed in the 19th or 18th or 16th century. It is clear that the Rizzi House project had opponents, and you can't imagine how many opponents there were when the building was complete. Happy Rizzi House is built, although in the center of the city, on the site of a former car park. So, nothing was broken here, nothing was removed. The house is small, compact. How come? Locals were displeased. Is it possible for pop art to be next to the medieval classics? It's unthinkable.
Yes, behind the building there is the old town, and in this area, I think it was really hard to find this house because here the architecture is different. But at the same time, there are still unusual buildings, both on the left and on the right. It is also possible to find modern houses nearby. So it turns out that here is the best location for Rizzi House.
The building actually consists of 9 towers. It has flat roofs. One of them was turned into a veranda. The windows are all different. There is not a single similar one, and there are ledges on the walls which makes the house resemble a children's toy even more. And these crossbars are blind rails. Now the blinds are raised, and when it's a particularly hot day, they are lowered. Tell me, how do I get to the top?
Go straight on and then turn left at the staircase.
Outside the Rizzi House seems to be residential, but in fact, this is what is usually called a business center. It has rooms for offices of different sizes. Inside, the feeling of unconventionalism and a lack of serious remain. It has walking, dancing, and laughing windows and faces. Bright colors. Geometry is intentionally broken everywhere. There's not a single regular rectangle or square, though there is everything you need to work. Even small kitchens on each floor. It is believed that everything bright has an exciting effect on the human psyche. In this sense, any tenant wouldn't last long here. But fortunately, Happy Rizzi House was lucky.
Our first tenants, bankers, thought the building was too modern for them. Now we have the second tenants, creative people, and for them, the building is simply amazing.
The unusual beauty of the Rizzi House has many opponents and admirers. Even though it fits into the city center, it looks like a challenge. It's like a bright spot among the historical buildings. Secretly speaking, the creators of the house admit that today, to do something similar would be impossible in Braunschweig. The Rizzi House is a result of, literally, the change of epochs. It is dedicated to the beginning of the new millennium. Then many unusual objects were created all over Europe. On the other hand, about 50% of all tourists now come to Braunschweig just to look at the Rizzi house. Many German magazines included it in the list of 100 most beautiful buildings in Germany. No, that's not all. It is enough to look at the faces of people who take pictures nearby. This is really the embodiment of the positive architecture, and everything that is needed for this was an unconventional structure of the building and bright drawings inside and on the facade.
The architect wanted to present art to people in the street. It's not an intellectual culture that makes you think only of itself. This building helps people think about what a wonderful day it is. We see how people laugh when they visit and see the house. During the work of the architect, the artist's ideas changed, which eventually resulted in such a building.
A typical courtyard. St. Petersburg has a lot of them, although they are found in other cities, including Moscow. That's how they are assumed to have appeared. Unusual buildings of the world. There is such an expression, a terraced house, when houses are placed side by side, wall to wall. This is the first stage of the appearance of courtyard. There is only one way to expand such a house, backwards. That's how buildings with windows facing inwards appeared, and they are connected to each other quite logically. The room isn't infinite. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 buildings, and a small yard in the middle. It is called a courtyard, narrow, dark, and deep. Unusual buildings of the world. It's amazing. If it were not for these courtyards in St. Petersburg, this beautiful house would have never been built. It is called Ring House. The ring house was a compelled solution in architecture. The client wanted, first of all, to build this house in the already constructed courtyard, then make it capacious, yet prevent it from blocking the sun from the surrounding buildings. It's clearly visible from a helicopter. Here is the originally built house. That's the courtyard, and the ring house is located on it. And that's amazing. Its size isn't actually small, because round houses are the most economical construction in terms of occupied land. The ring house is not only a forced architectural solution, but also a secret building hidden in the yard of another. It avoids tourist routes. It's hard to get inside the house. The first floor is for rented offices, and the second and the third are for communal apartments beaten down by life. The structure of each apartment, a long corridor along the inner radius, and the rooms diverge radially from it to the outer radius. The ring house is sometimes called the forerunner of constructivism, and there is pretty much some truth in it. According to some stories, the parents of a famous Russian poet, Pushkin, moved into the house soon after it was built. But most of all, inside it strikes us with new sensations. The circular shape arched all the rooms in the trapezoid with rounded sides. The head literally swirls from this unconventional shape. You immediately understand how typical and ordinary your accommodation is. Our rectangular rooms, like the only possible axiom, are somewhat entrenched in the brain. And this house, with a shape that is the closest to nature, influences people overwhelmingly. On the outside as well, it looks far more harmonious in contrast to crudely looking polygons of the surrounding buildings. In Moscow, too, there is a ring house. More precisely, 2 ring houses, or roundhouses. One of them is on Dovzhenko Street. The other is on Nezhinskaya Street. Well, from the ground, especially from the center of the yard, it's hard to see how unusual this house is. Trees cover the whole view. unusual buildings of the world. The ring house was also an inevitable solution. After a revolution against unnecessary architectural details of 1955, Russian architects had almost no opportunities to express themselves. As if it wasn't enough, they had even no place to do so. They were given house plans approved by the government. You have the plans and you have to work with them. You'd better not have any deviation or else. Well, you know what I mean. There was a stock list, a few prefab houses, and that's all. It was difficult to introduce something new, any new products. So he decided to play around the same apartment buildings in the southwest of Moscow and make various modifications of them. First, he made a plan of cross-shaped houses in one neighborhood. Then he came up with an idea of round houses, similar to fortresses. Since the terrain in the region wasn't flat, it has pits and hills here and there. So the idea was born, similarity to old fortresses on hills, to construct a roundhouse with panels from the so-called 515 production run, which was the most popular in Moscow in the 70s. In other words, this is built according to the plan, but just in a circle. What do we have as a result now? First, the roundhouse saves a lot of space. If this building is straightened, it will be very long, like a wall, and next to it, you cannot build anything more. The requirements for insulation are violated. Secondly, it's just a beautiful building. It's advantageous, and it looks attractive near the usual panel houses. A roundhouse is like a fortress, and its yard is like an internal micro-world, cozy and hidden from strangers. This is not a courtyard already. It's a field yard. The sizes, by the way, are similar. They say that if it hadn't been for the trees that grow here over 40 years, the hum made by people, children, and cars would resemble the sound in a stadium. This is a downside. And these are regular angles. That's why it was hard to furnish such rooms in Soviet times. Well, and the main reason why there are only 2 such houses in the largest city.
The problem was related to the fact that actually it was not a standard plan, and naturally, as for all non-standard plans, work on installation of the panels and new documents were required, and the house-building companies and the city authorities didn't want to go for such experiments. It was more profitable for them to build standard houses that existed at that time. Therefore, such individual experiments, in general, always ended with prototypes only.
There are buildings that are looking forward, into the future. In them, the search for new forms, materials, and a new aesthetic is combined. But there are buildings that are from the past, or from fiction. When did you build it?
In 2008.
And how much time did the construction take?
Approximately 5 months.
This hut is on Fowl's Lakes, but not far from St. Petersburg, is the biggest of all others, resembling the famous fairy tale prototype. In addition, it can spin around, facing us with its back to the forest. But there is no decent forest nearby, so the hut, as if in confusion, is spinning around on its own axis. Why a hut anyway, and not something else?
Well, it was popular among Russian poets. It's a national theme. Fun, yeah.
So you just got this idea in your head?
Yes, I just wanted it. Yeah, I thought about it. Well, I saw on the net a lot of flying objects like aliens, you know? And I wanted to do something patriotic. So this hut came into being.
The hut is a know-how. Its wooden part is a classic crib izba with expanding crowns. Legs are plastered iron bars, and the base is a rotary device from an excavator with a motor reducer, so it's not as cheap as it might seem, although the result is obvious. Okay, now the most important question, how to get on top.
You need a ladder.
So you just put it there and climb?
Yes.
Well, let's find a ladder then. Its creator, Vasily Kozin, built the hut not because he had nothing else to do. Well, he had almost nothing else to do. There is no practical use in it, except that now it attracts the attention of drivers. And nearby, you can put a billboard advertising, like a small business. Well, now you and I will see what's inside this hut on Fowl's legs. Oh, climbing. Inside the hut's inner structure is visible. Did you make all this with your own hands?
Yes, with my own hands.
2 main beams, and the rest is welded to them.
Yes.
Iron legs, and on top, it's not concrete, it's just plaster. The hut survived the test of time. It stands not for the first year, although the wind affects it. When you are inside, you can feel it shaking. So, are you confident about the hut?
Now, yes, definitely. Of course, we're standing. Now let's jump or something. Oh, well, I see you're constrained a little.
Let's not, I want to say.
Well, that's not. But here were 20 people once. It was a wedding.
The hut on Fowl's legs is what I meant by folk art. That's how, without any reason, with just imagination and desire, homes are built, which then may well become a landmark of the place. A building on legs is pretty much an architectural trend. In the world, there are buildings that stand on one leg only. This one-legged house is located in almost the most conservative area of Berlin. Built in the late 70s, even then it caused controversy and gossip. Isn't it too radical and bold? And it seems that the disputes between supporters and opponents of this house have not abated so far. This house, resembling either a mushroom on a knife or a tree, is called Bierpinsel, beer brush, literally. In Berlin, many buildings have nicknames, and this house earned it right at the opening. The building was invented and built in the late 70s and had no name, only a serial number. But during the presentation, all the journalists and just passers-by were treated to free beer, so the name appeared. Bierpinsel, beer brush. Although it's not a complete analogy, it's like a combination of four. A brush getting wider at the top and the main treat during the free ceremony.
The purpose of creating this building was to shade a little and prevent the overhead road, where we are standing now, from being so dominant in this place. Now, if you look around carefully, other buildings around, if we don't pay attention to those built in the 90s or 2000s, have 3 to 4 stories. The overhead road passes at the level of the second or the third story, so it dominates this district. Therefore, it was necessary to build something higher than this road.
Strangely enough, this very unusual building fulfills the task over and above. Attracting attention, it distracts from the road. And at the same time, it doesn't look heavy, just because of the thin leg on which it stands. Although it's very unusual, even for us, people who live already in the 21st century.
This building, it kind of explodes this atmosphere. Its ambivalence is something revolutionary on the one hand, but it's a revolution, as they say, a revolution in a glass. When a revolution is without victims, without blood, that is good. We go out, walk, sit in a cafe, eat ice cream. But then we look to the left, and in front of us, there is something that changes our everyday life. Then we go home and live as before. But here we relieved our feelings, looked at something that may not fit into the landscape, but if we, let's say, consider architects and architectural critics a part of the people, the attitude to this building is rather negative than positive.
It's negative because, like all unusual buildings, it irritates with its dissimilarity no matter what. As long as Bierpinsel stands, there will be arguments, no matter whether this neighborhood needs them or not. And its previous coloring, bright red, generally cause discontent. It's not a building, but some inflamed boil on the city body. The current coloring of Bierpinsel is forever young pop art. It reminds us somehow of the happy Rizzi house, although it's not that life-affirming. Its fate, just as people's attitude towards it, was ill-favored. First, there was a canteen. Then there was a disco right on the upper floors. Then the building was empty. 2 years ago, a water pipe flooded the building, and it was finally closed. It could have been demolished, but it seems Bierpinsel architects foresaw it. We can say that Bierpinsel is anatomically connected to a very important and necessary city facility, this highway through the Schlossstrasse. If you go down a little lower, it will be immediately visible. One of the pillars of the motorway is the base of the tower, its leg. So the designers kind of sewed their idea with Berlin. Well, probably hoping that now they can't exist without each other. Houses on legs, folklore or futuristic, are just the beginning. In the world, there are many buildings that seem to be soaring above their own foundation. They are practically in all major cities. And this is not just a fantasy of architects, but a completely pragmatic calculation. We will continue to explore the world of incredible and unusual buildings. And I'll start the next episode of the program, Experiments, with such multi-leg buildings.